soon as you take something out, then the job doesn't go away. And the simple way of looking at it, does this technology in terms of the virtual fencing, will it save you the number of hours that ultimately a labour resource will give to you? And fundamentally the answer is no, it won't. So you start running through those real world scenarios, and the real world scenarios for those multiple farm businesses or those farms that are managed is that someone literally, or the large scale farm, someone just literally wakes up that morning, catches up to you in the cowshed, hands you a letter saying, by the way, I'm leaving. And then all of a sudden, right, that happens. What's my backup plan? And more and more labour you remove from any situation, the more risk you add into that situation. And then, interestingly, again, the number of people I spoke to around Halter, they would say, no, haven't taken any staff out, but the day-to-day lives of the staff that we've retained and employ is easier.
This podcast is brought to you by GroundShift. If you're anything like me, you've probably realised that doing things the way they've always been done doesn't always lead to better outcomes on the farm. And that's where GroundShift comes in. GroundShift is all about helping farmers rethink the way that they approach their soils, the inputs into their system, and improving their overall farm system performance. We focus on building resilience, improving efficiency, and ultimately creating more profitable farm systems. It's not always about throwing more into your system. Sometimes it's about understanding what's driving those results beneath the surface. So if you're serious about improving your farm's profitability and resilience, and utilising biology to drive your farm system performance, I highly recommend checking out groundshift.ag, and you can follow them online at groundshift.ag on Instagram. Welcome to another episode of From the Soil Up podcast. Today's special guest is David March from the Thielen Farm Group. I'm really excited to have this chat today because this report is one of the very interesting ones that has recently come out of Kellogg, and it's an area that I wanted to learn a lot more about, which is around the wearable technology and its actually return on value to the farmer. So David's gone and done all the hard research and cracked a few numbers as well. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. I think it's going to provide a lot of value for those people interested in this technology, because more and more people keep talking to me about it, and they're very interested in adopting it. So this is going to be a great conversation. So without further ado, let's get into it. David, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you, Conan, and thanks for the invite on. Giving me something a little bit different to do on a Friday morning.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to have this conversation. You've done a great report, and I think it's going to be a really good chat because I've got some of my own questions that I think you've answered as well. So first up, David, if you were advising a farmer sitting on the fence about this wearable technology right now, what's the single most important question you'd ask them to probably ask themselves before they commit to this tech?
Yeah, and it's probably... It's a single question about nearly any investment behind the farm gate, which is literally, what is the problem that you are trying to solve? You know, if we can define that and we can shape that question, then on the back of that, then there's likely to be a really good investment decision made. There's likely to be value extracted from that investment. But unless we know exactly what we're trying to do, we're not effectively going down the line of we're sheep, we're just following what other people have done. What is the problem we're trying to solve? And if we start there, I genuinely believe good things can happen on the back of that question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost getting back to what's the root cause of that problem, and is this investment actually going to solve that, or does it mask it longer term?
Yeah.
So I guess this kind of leads into this, one of those kind of key themes that you talked about within your report, which is around you making the point that wearables should really come after the infrastructure investment. So in your experience, what are some of those common infrastructure problems that farmers have been overlooking or underinvesting? And then why are they looking at these technology solutions to try and solve those?
It's a really interesting question, and I've spent a long time thinking about this in our own farm situation, which we'll get to later in this chat. But in terms of where I believe that investment, it fundamentally anything in the animal health space, so whether it's investment in races or, more importantly, investment in people, training people to pick things up early. There are a whole lot of farms out there that will have a lameness incidence of less than 3%. And it's not for lack of it being picked up. It sits around targeted investment into the right areas. Comes back to that fundamental thing that prevention is always going to be better than cure. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be easier. And so all of these things that we put in the animal health space, especially because that was when we got into the research project, the animal health space was probably the biggest single item across both the technologies that we looked at. So investment in there, and then secondly, investment in staff to pick things up early and everything else. And probably the most interesting thing, obviously, everywhere I go now and people sort of recognise or hear the name and work out who I am, the conversation invariably trends to wearables, which is never where I wanted it to go in the first place. But that, we use wearables. How are you getting on with it? Where do you find the biggest benefit? And what I've probably found subsequently is I've allocated far too much weight on the animal health, because the amount of farms that do not use SenseHub or Halter in the animal health space and use it to the nth degree is quite striking.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a bad way. It's pretty clear that the technology works. I mean, at no point in any of my discussions are we talking about a product that does not work. I mean, we've ultimately in the industry, we've got 1 in 4 adaptation rates, mainly because it does work. But the false positives, ultimately it's measuring against a baseline. All that happens is you end up with this cow that's been drafted or flagged, and then what do you do on the back of it? You still got to work out what the issue is, and it's probably one of the reasons why on paper, yes, this technology will help you identify a lot of animal health issues earlier, but when it comes to the practicality of it all, can we actually and it's something it's hard to discuss in a research paper, but face-to-face, how do we actually monetize this? And the options to monetize it in terms of how it's being used at the moment are relatively limited in my view.
Yeah, and that you're talking about monetizing it from, I guess, the farmer's point of view, not the company selling it.
Yeah, exactly. So I purposefully looked at this from a financial perspective only. And again, subsequent conversations post-research have told me that people will quite happily conflate financial versus non-financial. And ultimately what it is value. But I was really purposeful, hey, this is the financial. Now, that stems from working for a company that tends to have a lot of focus on the financial. And we'll come back to a little bit of that later. But what you just had it conflated, and it's really, really difficult. So, unashamedly, I focused on the financial only, and ultimately the results spoke for themselves.
Absolutely. So, before we get a bit deeper into this and touch on some of that information from your report, can you introduce yourself for those of people who aren't familiar who you are and a bit about your background?
My name is David March. I grew up in the UK, in the Lake District in the northwest of England. Went to school over in the northeast of the country, and went to Royal Agricultural College, Cirencester, and it was there I got the opportunity to do an exchange year as part of my undergrad, and that led me to Massey University in Palmerston North in 1996, and 30 years later I'm still in the country, so it was all a little bit of an accident. There was no master plan there, but I came back after my university study, worked for a company called Marvin Farm Services. So I worked on 15 different farms in and around the Waikato. A lot of mum and dad going to the batch, and here's the keys to the house and the chickens and the dog and the cows for the next 10 days, and away you go. And then from there, I kicked off my career as a consulting officer with what was at the time Livestock Improvement Advisory, obviously now Dairy NZ. So I was there for a handful of years, then moved on to rural banking with National Bank. And then again, 4 or 5 years in that space. And then, the corporate agriculture journey started. So I was with Fonterra's International Farming for a couple of years through 2011 through 2013, then worked for Maori Incorporation, Wearables Incorporation, so they're in Mangakino, large-scale dairy farming group, forestry investment and some other things going on as well. And then latterly, I've just ticked over 6 years with the Land Farm Group, working for its North Island operation.
Awesome. And the Land Group, they're quite a big farming a group. Obviously, they've got quite a number of farms here in Canterbury as well, and I think down in Southland, is that correct?
Yeah. So I should know this a lot better than I do, but up until recently, where we now share a general manager, the two businesses were run completely separate. So I think there are 9 farms operating as 11, or maybe the other way around down in the South Island. In the North Island, we've got 10 dairy farms. So we're approximately wintering somewhere in the region of across the country around 23,000 dairy cows. So certainly up until the last couple of years, the overall group is in the top 5 largest dairy farming groups in the country.
Awesome. That's cool. You've had quite a varied background there, and I guess some of it has probably set you up to do the numbers side of things here with your report. Have you always had a bit of a mind for numbers and the profitability side for farming?
Yeah. Something that's managed to follow me, I'd probably say accidentally through my career. Yes, I kicked off, as I said, as a consulting officer, and at the time that they were probably 3 years into it, but they were starting to get what the forerunner to Dairy Base up and going. So it's called Profit Watch. And it was relatively simple because Mum and Dad had their accounts. Obviously, the businesses were relatively simple at that stage. And so you'd run them through, and then all of a sudden you got a pretty good guess as to what, you started to look at relationships between animal health per cow and profitability. You started looking at production per cow and profitability, and actually starting to see that there was starting to be a bit of a disconnect where once upon a time in the old New Zealand farming systems, production per cow generally meant production per hectare was up and profit would be up as well. Everyone running those System 1, System 2 farms compared to the diversity that we run now. So that's where it all started. And then obviously you get into the banking side of things, and if you're not into your numbers there, then it's slightly problematic. And then it was really once I got into Fonterra, because my role there was actually farm systems analyst or farm business analyst. And so we were looking at a whole lot of stuff in these massive 3,000, 6,000 cow TMR barn systems where we had collars employed, for example. We had a whole range of technologies and a whole range of investment options. So the ability to actually get into it and actually work out what the best plan of attack was going to be was pretty huge in the end. And then, from there, just carried on. And we certainly live in a data-filled life. I'm not going to say data-rich because I sometimes believe it does make us a wee bit poorer. But I've lived in the numbers for probably far too long, Conan.
Yeah, and there's only just more and more numbers, it seems, all the time. It's particularly in dairy farming. It's one of those ones where there's no end of data. It's just figuring out how to use it well, I guess, is the main thing.
Yeah.
So for those listeners who may not be familiar with what cow wearable technology is, what are they actually designed to do? Yeah,
so we've effectively got two kinds that stands at the moment. The first one is behavioural monitoring. So effectively a whole lot of sensors on a collar or even an air tag or even a bolus in the stomach. Not going to pretend I'm an expert in the actual setup of these technology, but fundamentally a whole lot of sensors establish a baseline, and when you have an animal that acts differently to that baseline, it means that there is potentially something from an animal health perspective as an alert. So, for example, we know that cows, when they're in heat, they jump on each other. The accelerometer will pick that up, and that's effectively how we do the heat detection through this technology. Yeah, and animals that are lame, they move differently and walk differently to how they are when they're not lame. So that the technology picks up these kinds of sensors. So that's on the behavioural monitoring. So that is the majority of the wearables in the world market even, but certainly the New Zealand market. What is unique to New Zealand is Halter, which is virtual fencing. So using a series of electrical and sound cues, they use that for remote shepherding, which means that from the comfort of your boat, your lounge, you can move a mob of cows from point A to point B in your farm with absolute certainty that it is going to happen. So coming back to part of the discussion previously, this technology does work. It is really neat. It's really unique. But at the moment, Halter is the only virtual fencing option in the dairy space in New Zealand as it stands at the moment.
Yeah, and there's a lot of keen interest in the Halter tech at the moment. It seems to be the new shiny exciting thing in the industry. What sparked your interest in investigating the cow wearables as your kind of focus for Kellogg?
Probably professional curiosity would be the single reason I would give. There have been a couple of things that really prompted me. First one was obviously being one of the larger farming groups in the country. Every salesperson drove down the driveway and had their crack at selling us their products. And I'd be there, relatively time poor, but would take the time to listen, go through it all, try and understand, right, how could I make this work? And every calculation I did on the back of the envelope told me that I can't make this stack up. And then had another little bit of a revelation is when I was judging the finals for Farm Manager of the Year competition, and it's the first time I'd actually been onto a Halter farm. This might be back in 2021 or 2022, and saw that they hadn't changed their labour, they weren't doing any more production, their cell count was actually on the verge of being not picked up by Fonterra. Then all of a sudden, it would have been about 18 months later, I saw this farm be a local poster child for Halter, and it was around 10% reduction in lameness. So again, just started to click. Hey, something is there's a lot of very careful and dedicated marketing going on here. That doesn't necessarily take in the whole farm system. And then the other one was I watched another group had put in cow manger technology, hadn't rolled out the training to the staff, and all of a sudden the mating was a shambles. And this poor manger, I've never seen anybody as stressed and perturbed because he's a good operator. And adaptation of this technology had seen his operation go backwards. So it started to really pique the curiosity. And then once I got it accepted onto Kellogg, the opportunity to duck in and have a deeper look at the financials wasn't one I was going to turn down. So that's where it all came from.
That's awesome. So there was a bit of a gap in what you saw was being marketed or you were being told, and how this technology is being evaluated as well, so that it's not kind of showing the whole picture of what's actually possible on the farm or that whole scenario or context that they're working with. Is there something that farmers kind of should be asking or that they should be thinking about, or advisors should be when they're thinking about this technology?
Yeah, it still comes through, in my view, to that original question. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And for some people, it might be that the problem I'm trying to solve is not have to get out of bed early. So if I give myself an hour longer in bed each day, so I'm out at 5:30, not 4:30, because the cows are already at the shed because I've used it, that could actually be a genuine reason. I guess comes back to that other bit of the conversation we had before. As long as we recognise that that's a non-financial benefit, and we're not sitting here trying to add some unrealistic financial numbers to that activity. And as I said before, I felt a lot of the marketing claims were and are exaggerated, and I certainly make that as one of my recommendations in my report, which is where people are selling these products, we need to use farm-specific information, not averages, not outliers, and just make sure people are in the position to make good decisions. Fair enough, you've got this farm that reduced their lameness by 10%. Great. How much is that actually worth? What is the value of that? And again, that's where one of the genesis of my project came around, because it was that professional curiosity. Well, what is it worth? And some of the rabbit holes you go down trying to find this out on your literature researches, you'll know from doing your own Kellogg project at one point, Conan, the rabbit holes we go down are quite fantastic at times. But coming back to your questions, I just feel that farmers and advisors aren't necessarily asking what is the value of this product to me and my situation.
Yeah, on those rabbit holes, I've actually kind of recently just been down the one around what is the benefits of reducing lameness in terms of financials, because I was actually trying to compare UK data to New Zealand data in terms of farming. Yeah, I was down there earlier this week, which is quite ironic. So I guess with your report, you were quite deliberate around choosing higher performing farms or farms that are already performing well. Why did you feel that was important to the integrity of your research that you were doing?
As you know, when you do these Kellogg research projects, when what you start out intending to do rarely turns out to be the finished article. And where I actually started with, I wanted to grab between 10 and 15 farms that used Halter, 10 and 15 farms that use SenSub/Allflex, use third-party information to do these kind of case studies. But where I quickly realised is that this dragged on, and would make contact with farms, some of which I knew, some of which have been referred to me, and quite often along the way discovered that these guys didn't actually, even though some simple, trying to tease out, right, what was your 6-week in calf rate, for example, in the 2 years prior to adaptation of this technology, and what has been your results 2 years since. And I probably tried to bite off way more than I can chew, but there was a definite theme of, you've had the misfortune to read my entire project, Conan. You'll see the amount of data that has been extrapolated to put in there. So I went to the only source that I could find that data, which was my own farm. So it's probably no surprise to most people that farms A, B, and C are part of the suite of the 7 farms that I look after, or have looked after, for over 6 years now. So I knew the farms intimately. We've already established I'm a little bit of a data junkie at the best of times, and so had all of this information relatively easy to hand. But even then, as I got into marrying up the literature review around, right, what's the key bit of data or benchmark I need to be on this hand to work out what value we've got on this other side, and even that just meant that what I was asking of these third-party farmers to provide, it probably wouldn't have been in a position to drop out the results that we did. It's probably the frightening thing, and to get to the level of granularity that I wanted to get to with the research, you actually need a huge amount of data. And the expectation that every farm business has that data is probably an unrealistic one, might be where I get to. But coming back to your original question, I didn't deliberately choose farms that were performing well. It just so happened that the 3 farms I chose out of the ones I look after. They were performing quite well. I think the integrity from the research comes from just the integrity of the data that has formed the basis of the case study, and therefore the conclusions that drop out at the end.
I think that data piece is quite interesting, because I'm having similar experiences myself with the depth of knowledge that farmers have, because I'm trying to create some baseline data with onboarding new farms, and just the level of data detail that different farmers have over their farm or what's really important to them is quite interesting. And then obviously I want to get some of that granular data, and it's almost like you're asking too much, and it's like, well, what is the key data aspects that I can pull so I can get an overview of the farm and how it's trending over the last couple of years to try and build some ideas going forward. So I sympathise with you there, and you sound like you know your data a lot better than me, so I'm just scratching the surface.
Yeah, I broadly take the view that if I can fill in dairy-based level 1 and level 2, then, as a gold standard for industry, if farms could get their data systems in place to be able to record all that information with integrity, I think, the industry would be in a good space at that point, for sure.
Cool. I'll write that one down for myself. So you obviously have chosen Halter and SenseHub as your kind of 2 wearables as a focus. You've already kind of given us a quick overview of wearables, but how do these 2 differ, and why did you choose just these 2 when there's 10 or so in the market?
Again, it comes into, with research projects, just making sure that you don't try and bite off more than you can chew. Mm-hmm. And as you say, there's 10 to a dozen products on the market. There's actually new entrants all the time as well. Especially in the last couple of years as the the market has heated up, as it were. So I chose SenseHub All Flex. I had some internal marketing research that had been done by one of the companies that said that they were a dominant player, and so they at the time, so they were chosen to be representative of the wearables that pick up those animal behavioural stuff that we did previously. And the other thing we've mentioned previously is Halter is the only virtual fencing. So obviously there's a fundamental difference in costs between the behavioural monitoring only and the virtual fencing as well. So the opportunity to go the cheaper product with a limited range of functionality versus Halter with all the bells and whistles, the virtual fencing but obviously a more expensive product. The opportunity to put those products side by side, it covered what at the time was 100% of the virtual fencing market and probably 60% of the other wearable market.
That's cool. So obviously I'm aware with Halter, there's obviously the different levels of, I guess you could say, subscription. How did you decide which level to, utilise? Did you go kind of middle of the road, which is probably what most farmers use?
Yeah, on both. Went middle of the road with Halter, just saying, what is the average farmer who's going to adopt this technology going to do? We went middle of the road with Halter, and we went the premium with Allflex, which again gave the information around their rumination, etc., etc. So the most amount of animal health monitoring that was possible, and probably more representative of where people were investing for things other than heat detection, where they would actually go.
So I guess the biggest, or one of the claims that a lot of these wearables, market on is labour efficiency as being one of their biggest drivers for value, particularly being able to remove labour units or partially remove labour units. Were you quite cautious around how realistically those actually translate to practice? And I guess what are the actual constraints about being able to create that labour efficiency by using wearables?
Yeah, the labour efficiency one is another reason why I purposely set up my farm for looking at larger farms. So obviously the smaller case study in terms of peak cow numbers was around 720. So I purposely looked at larger farms to give the virtual fencing and that remote shepherding every opportunity to capture its benefits in full. And then once I started to work it through with real life examples, so I've got the 720 cow farm. We're operating through a large herringbone shed, which basically means that I need 2 people in the pit at all times. It's 50 cups, 50 aside. Therefore, I've got someone in, so I've got that constraint. So if I put Halter on, I wouldn't need the third person roster on every day. And then you start looking at, so I'm now on three people roster. What does that look like? And you go through, how do I cover annual leave? How do I cover sickness? How do I cover injury? The number of animals on average at each full-time unit is looking after, is it starting to genuinely test some boundaries? And then what is the flip side of not being able to do that? How are we going to maintain our staff to working a 100-hour fortnight? Because as soon as you take something out, then the job doesn't go away. And the simple way of looking at it, does this technology in terms of the virtual fencing, will it save you the number of hours that ultimately a labour resource will give to you? And fundamentally the answer is no, it won't. So you start running through those real world scenarios, and the real world scenarios for those multiple farm businesses or those farms that are managed is that someone literally, or the large scale farm, someone just literally wakes up that morning, catches up to you in the cow shed, hands you a letter saying, by the way, I'm leaving. And then all of a sudden, right, that happens. What's my backup plan? And more and more labour you remove from any situation, the more risk you add into that situation. And then, interestingly, again, the number of people I spoke to around Halter, they would say, no, haven't taken any staff out, but the day-to-day lives of the staff that have we've retained and employ is easier. So it does avoid, the getting up early. It does avoid a little bit of the mundane, which is sitting behind a mob of cows on a motorbike. And I probably hark back to my days where my cousin, working my cousin in the UK, who'd just chuck me in the drop me down to the paddock, and I'd walk back with the cows to go. But it genuinely is, the mundane. So, again, from that value proposition, if you want to get rid of the stuff that can really annoy some of your staff, hey, the virtual fencing certainly is part of that solution as well.
It's kind of one of those things that it's about the kind of non-financial benefits that are hard to quantify, but I guess quality of life for the staff is where they might benefit more from, or actually more, if you're retaining that staff, you can actually reprioritise some of that time to doing other jobs around farm.
Yeah, and as ever in farming, we all want to be employing our hour to tasks that add more and more value to what we're doing. If we're having to focus on, in the spring, for example, getting up down cows because our magnesium program hasn't been running as well as it should have been. Meanwhile, we've got a farm manager doing that, and yet the pasture management is being compromised as a result. So all of these things, there's absolutely value that can be attached to it.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of one of your main things, and we've talked about it quite a few times already throughout this, is around those financial versus non-financial benefits being actually real and meaningful to farmers. And is a conversation that you obviously have been having with farmers everywhere that you go now, since people want to talk about wearables with you?
At the end of the day, it's ultimately their decision to make. It is, as we've repeated many times over the last 30 or so minutes, it is financial and it is the non-financial, which does create the value in these products. Ultimately, people will place their own non-financial assessment of worth based on their own individual circumstances. And repeating what I said earlier, I've purposefully focused on the financial only in my report, because it allows that non-financial for people to separate, attribute their own value, their own experience, and effectively what their assessment is of what it will do to their day-to-day. But the interesting one probably sits in the mating, because for all the farms I look after, which covers over 7,000 cows wintered, we do see that fatigue in week 5 of mating. And, you just, because these farm managers and all of my farm staff work so incredibly hard. And, that last week, at the end of November, that's the last push over the top before we can relax. And, let's remember that these guys have been operating at a pretty high intensity from broadly the 15th of July through to the 15th of December. So anything that can actually, towards the end of that period, remove cognitive load, et cetera, can only be a good thing. I've been unfortunate to be an operations manager, and it would have been, I think, 10 or 11 years ago, we actually had a girl that worked for us attacked by a bull. And it was a very sad, very tough time for her and her family, and it is etched into my memory. But systems that can actually deliver an exceptional mating result without having bulls on farm, well, again, for some people, we talk about health and safety, mitigate, isolate, eliminate. Well, hey, if we can eliminate the hazard, that's the best of all. So if we don't have bulls on farm and we have this technology that is going to do the job as well as a trained and competent member of staff, then hey, again, for a number of businesses, there's something in there. And obviously a lot of talk around dairy beef at the moment, and there's potential tie-ins there. I think it's more of a casual relationship at this stage. Just because we can ID these animals, or do the heat identification, and it does lean itself into a little bit of that dairy beef system. But I wonder if we're going to have the same amount of excitement as and when and if schedule drops back to significantly below $6, which is probably only a mistimed missile or a flick of a coin away at times. Yeah.
Well, if you look at market cycles, everything kind of goes through its cycle, so it is just a matter of time. It will be interesting to see where the dairy beef space does end up, because there is a lot of excitement, not just here, but in Australia and all other parts of the world is this big opportunity. In terms of the mating, could you see a return on investment for these wearables for the mating that was actually financial, or was it mainly more that non-financial benefits?
The mating one's really interesting, and I didn't really lean into it too much in my research project, but there's two. I know Livestock Improvement have and Dairy and Zed have done a whole lot of high-level work through over the 23-24 season and 24-25 season. And both years, effectively, 3,200 farms without wearables, comparing their mating results with 900 farms with wearables. And there is no statistical difference between them all. So that is the first thing to get across. And Dairy and Zed's statement in this space, and it's my statement as well, is if you use wearable technology for heat identification, you will not get a worse result than you would have through a trained and competent person doing that heat identification. So that's the first thing. I think the wearables, and probably one of the more, I've trying to stay away from general statements here, but the wearables in this mating space, it preys upon every farmer's worst nightmare, which is through my lack of attention or through being tired of something else, I am responsible for missing the heat of this animal, therefore I am responsible for it being empty. And you don't see it implicitly, but some of the marketing, hey, we'll pick up those silent animals that you fallible human, you've missed this animal, but this technology will pick it up for you. And the reality is, in terms of mating, it doesn't. All the wearables do generally is focus solely on that heat identification. You spread out the actual mating problem. Dairy and Zed's got this brilliant model where you've got these 8 different balls, from nutrition to genetics to ball management to escape me. But all of these things, there's 7 other things other than heat identification that can trip us up. And then ultimately, it's why we still see farms with wearables dropping out 20% plus empty rates. There is no silver bullet in this space. We look at our own journey at the Land Farm Group, and I know these results are replicated in the North and the South Island groups. We've got rid of all intervention. We've got rid of bringing in any holdover cows at all. And ultimately, we've married that up with selective once-a-day milking around where intervention historically would have been used. And I can talk for the North Island's group set of results. We've moved our 6-week and calf rate over the last 3 full seasons from 63% 6-week and calf rate to 73%. Nice. And we've moved our nodding calf rate from over 17% to under 12%, just by almost going back to the future more than anything else. So, what's my return on investment of doing that? Quite large. And it was for just taking a step back, going, right, we've got this problem. We know we've got this problem. What are we going to do to fix it? How are we going to do it? And don't get us wrong, wearables was part of that discussion, but we quickly moved away from that space. So we know they work. How do you get good mating results? It's having an honest conversation. I will put a plug out here for Dairy and Zed and their in-calf project as well. Obviously, go back 10, 12 years ago, that in-calf project, as they let it out at the time, was some pretty neat work. Obviously, originally led by Dairy Australia in the 2000s. 2010s, Dairy and Zed have run with it. It is just an absolute fountain of knowledge in that in-calf handbook. Anyone who's battling with their mating results, etc., jump in there, run through those performance gap calculators, keep an open mind, and every answer you need to your problems probably sits in that booklet.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question, is what tips do you have around this? Because that's actually quite a significant improvement you've had there with the farms that you oversee. That's pretty cool. And I'm definitely going to go away and read that book now, or that booklet and all that research. That sounds fascinating, because it is a common thing that you see with farmers around. If they do get a good result, they can't really pinpoint what was any different from the year before, because they're normally playing with a few different things. And as you say, it's not one silver bullet when it comes to mating.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we're ultimately never going to know everything to do with mating. But if we come into, and it's how I approach most issues on farming, because the joys of my role in that operations manager space is that I had a former colleague who basically described it as jack of all trades, master of none. You know, what in the morning you could be dealing with compliance, at lunchtime you're dealing with the staff issue, and then in the afternoon you're dealing with quite a technical pasture management or feed budget issue that you need to do. So you're across it all, but really simply, is there a problem? If so, what is the problem? What are the options? What are we going to do? And I got taught that process many years ago, and it has just stuck with me all the way through. But we sometimes skip over that second question, because the first one is there a problem? Yep. And then it's that next question. If so, what is the problem? And all too often we skip that stage, and we those of us who live and breathe agriculture every day of our working lives. We know that cause and effect are very, very frequently not lined up. And you're going to your own farms, Conan, that you're delivering advice and value into, and your ability to line up. Well, hey, we're getting this result, but it's because of this, and there'll be times you think, well, it's probably not, but we might need to go on a little bit of a journey here as to how we get everybody to be aligned in what it is that we're trying to do. Whether it's mating, whether it's a lot of the animal health stuff, lameness and everything else. That ability to get in, right, what is the problem? Or more importantly, what is the gap? Where are we now? Where do we want to be? Where does industry tell us we can get to? What are we actually targeting to? Yeah, the joys of working in corporate farms is quite often, you're reporting to an advisory board of things, and they've always got lots of questions for you. And the one question I always ask back up: at what point do we know we've got to where we want to get to? At what point do we stop trying, not at a farm level, but for these individual benchmarks? At what point do we stop putting an overweight of time and effort into fixing, and then we can move on to the next problem?
I think that's not just even corporate farms, it's even just farmers. It's like, what are we actually trying to get to? Like, do we actually have a core metric, and is it reasonable as well? And is that little bit of effort trying to get that last bit actually worth it? I think some people spend a lot of time and effort and money trying to get that last little percentage out of their business, and it's like, well, that might not return what you think it won't, and it's actually just about hitting that goal more than anything.
And to bring that conversation full circle back to wearables, I do talk about the law of diminishing returns, and it is, how much of that last percent do we need to capture, and what is the cost that needs to be outlaid to capture it? And invariably, it will cost more to capture that last little bit than what we can return from it.
Yeah, it's marginal analysis is something that I think is so important in farming, but it can be very hard to do because farm systems are so complex. So at what point is my maximum return on investment on, say, fertilizer or wearables or repo, and then when does that start diminishing down? So it's very interesting. I think one of the cool things that you've kind of done around that in your report is that sensitivity analysis around the cost of the hardware. At what point does that become reduced enough to actually make these wearables actually work from a return on investment financially?
Yeah, it was an interesting one, and I probably surprised myself when I got right into the cost of the technology and the various sensitivities. There was things that did start to move it into positive territory. So potentially with the behavioural monitor, I can see a situation where those technologies are going to get commoditized. I can see the cost of them coming down in real and nominal terms. Certainly in the short term, and I think there is every chance that in terms of using this technology as heat detection over the next 10 years, I think it could well become the norm in the industry. Virtual fencing is slightly different because at the moment there's only one player in the market, and as a nation of New Zealanders, we struggle with only having two supermarket players, and we hold inquiry after when we've got two players in the market, and when we've only got one, do we really think that there's going to be benevolence at the forefront of how that technology is rolled out. So I think the short answer is until we see some genuine competition in the space and the virtual fencing, I can't see that likelihood of the cost reduction coming in. Probably interesting to note that they're, we're maybe going back 3-4 years ago, where Halter did actually recognise that their product was too expensive, and they have this massive advertising campaign around, I can't remember if it was a 32 or a 36% reduction in cost.
37 or 36, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not the first person to go through this exercise and work out that, for the most, and certainly if you are focused on your financial returns, then these products are expensive.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I noticed was when your report kind of first came out towards the end of last year is that it actually got taken down for a little while. Is there a bit of a story in behind that?
Yeah, there's a wee bit of a story. I'll go with the short version, but it probably got taken down for a little bit longer because I didn't actually realise it had been taken down because I was on holiday in the UK for 6 weeks, and I took the opportunity to really clear the top 2 inches and turn off my emails. I just gave my boss my personal email address and said, if it's important, come on this one, otherwise the emails are off. Anyway, long story short is that I was in a hotel in Scotland. I get a message through someone on LinkedIn who said to me, hey, where's your report gone, David? I can't find it. And I jumped online myself, couldn't find it, and I thought, well, something a bit weird. Go and looked at a couple of my Kellogg cohorts, just check that their reports are still there. Yeah, no, they're still there. Anyway, turned the emails back on, and 9 days after the reports had gone up, mine had got a note from my professor saying that mine had been taken down. So I got into it, and ultimately, what transpired was Halter had taken umbrage at a couple of the assumptions, mainly around the past utilisation, and the statement in my report that was around if you've got a well subdivided farm of good contour, then you will have there is no benefit to your past utilisation available to you, and that certainly didn't line up with their marketing campaign they had at the time on the back of Ag First's work. And so whether it's any more than, hey, we've got some genuine concerns there, or there's something a bit more nefarious, I'm probably never going to know, and I probably don't need to know. But it was a little bit of excitement because I certainly wasn't expecting a research project that this data nerd was doing was going to cause a multi-billion-dollar company a few sleepless nights.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think with any of this technology, it all comes down to the individual farmer. Like, this is my sayings for around, Halter or any of the virtual fencing, or I guess the any of the pasture-based satellite stuff, is if you are like a lazy farmer and you don't have good pasture management beforehand, it doesn't actually enable you to be automatically really good at that. You actually have to put in the work to make it good. So a good farmer, really top end, will, I reckon, can in some regards grow a bit more pasture, but that's not everyone. That's probably the 1%. And if you are a farmer who's looking to do less work on farm and not manage your pastures as well, I don't think you'll get the benefit. And actually, a lazy farmer will be lazier with the tech. It just enables them to do that. So it's kind of like, you're a good farmer. You should be able to utilize it well. It's kind of those non-return on financial investments. But it actually does link to your finances. If you're lazy, it'll probably make you lazier.
Yeah, and you've probably nailed the nail on the head with that analogy, because I always talk about, if you don't know that you shouldn't be on a 25-day at the end of August, and so wearables will still mean you get on a 25-day round at the end of August, but you've just done it really simply and easily. But that base knowledge and understanding what and why and how, it doesn't go away. So there genuinely is nothing transformational around the pasture management aspect of Halter. But as you say, you put it into some of those operators that can extract it, then hey, there is a potential, but I'd still argue it would come back to the law of diminishing returns in that well subdivided, good contoured land.
Yep.
But get onto steeper property, and this is where, I do actually genuinely believe that the virtual fencing proposition is transformational. Steeper property, which historically for New Zealand is into that sheep and beef territory. I'm really excited around what can and will happen in that space. And certainly my colleague Natasha Cave, that's what she did her project on. So if you want to have a look at those opportunities in the dry stock space, then check out Natasha's project from the second half of 2025, Kellogg cohort 54.
I'll have to check that one out, because I'm also of the opinion for sheep and beef hill country, it could be a game changer, and we are seeing now that things have gone to the satellite. It has opened the doors, so we will now start seeing that at scale across the country, and how valuable it is. It's pretty cool. Do you think kind of where wearable technology is now? How do you see it evolving, say, over the next decade?
Not sure, and I try not to put too much of my brain power into this, because I'm not going to be in a position to control any of it. I certainly don't feel as if I'm missing out at the moment. At the end of the day, wearables remain relatively new to New Zealand, but overseas they've been employed at scale for a generation or more. It really is relatively normal technology. It's certainly in those housed barn systems that have been run offshore. I think it would be great if we could really get that animal health monitoring stuff bedded in and repeatable across all farms. Because ultimately, in my view, that would have really great outcomes for the animal first and foremost, and then secondly for the industry as a whole. If we can just raise that bar around how we go with our approach to managing animal health ailments, I think our industry would be in a much stronger space. Yeah,
I totally agree with you on that. What actually made you want to undertake the Kellogg program in the first place?
Probably challenge myself. Might have been getting a little stale, and I certainly was aware there's a whole lot of stuff around leadership that I could learn and could apply. I first got mentioned, and I give a shout out to these two ladies, but Mandy McLeod and Nicola Morris. They'd been on at me in late 2000s, early 2010s. Hey, this is something you should be looking at doing. And in hindsight, I took on the challenge as a 48-year-old. And I could have been doing it as in my early 30s, at which point I wouldn't have had a young family. I wouldn't have had quite as stressful a job, and it would have been a hell of a lot easier at that point. But no, it certainly was an opportunity to challenge myself and get some start to get some knowledge around the leadership side of things. I've been managing and leading people now for the last decade, and certainly if I'd undertaken something like Kellogg earlier in the piece of leading and managing people, I might not have made quite a few of the fundamental errors I've undoubtedly made in that time. There's a lot of retrospective learning going on in that classroom in Lincoln. But overall, it was about challenge. I'm a big believer in that personal development and professional development. And reality was, in 5 years in the role I'm currently in, I hadn't done anything. So. Looked at a few options. The Kellogg one was always there, and managed to apply, get on, and as I say, the rest is history.
Yeah. What was kind of your biggest surprise from going through the program?
Really obvious in hindsight, but I always thought that if you worked hard on your budget discipline, your systems discipline, all of those leadership and professional things that ultimately get you hired on jobs. One of the tutors, and I don't know if he was doing this bit of it when you went through the Kellogg program, Conan, but Rob Holt.
Oh, yeah.
His stuff for me in that leadership space was utterly transformational, but his focus on that interpersonal and intrapersonal, so how you work on your own and your relationships with other people is equally as important as all those other attributes, or as he probably summed up the same to both of us. By the way, this leadership and professional, this is the stuff over here that will get you hired. by the way, this inter and intrapersonal stuff over here, this is what will get you fired every time.
Yeah, it's so true. And I mean, I've spent a lot of money on personal development, and I think Kellogg was the one that really kicked it all off for me and has sent me on my journey to where I am today. But what I'm realising is, like, you can have all the skills and you can keep getting more and more knowledge, but it's actually that the ability to connect with people and communicate well and understand where people are and where people are at in terms of different worldviews. That's what really helps to make things successful, particularly when you're working with businesses. And yeah, I've got certainly plenty to learn and a lot of mistakes to come, I imagine, but that's where the growth is. So for one farmer or anyone who's kind of listening to this, what is one thing that you'd be keen for them to take away from whether they've read your report or not?
As with any investment, and I'm going to repeat myself, what problem am I trying to solve?
I love that. That's baked into my brain. And I think that one that's that second question underneath that is really key as well, is like, what is the problem I'm trying to solve here?
Yeah.
It's almost like that 5 why thing that they teach you in Kellogg in the first week as well. Just keep asking why.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like to finish up all my podcasts with one kind of final question, which is around what's one belief or principle that keeps you grounded no matter what season you're in?
Yeah. And as with anybody in farming, it's plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah.
So live and die by it. I can't remember who the chap doing the talk was, but it was at when Pioneer ran their rural professionals thing. They don't do it anymore, but it used to run every other year. And he stood up there and says, I get really embarrassed when, farmers, are in the news potentially a handout after a flood or a drought, or certainly in a drought. He said, we know these things, so set your farm up. Have a livestock class that's tradable and have a stack of silage on hand. And
that's good advice.
So it summed it up really, really well for me. And then the other one. So sorry, I'm going to take it out from one, and there's two. It's also Rudyard Kipling's Two Imposters, Triumph and Disaster. Ultimately, in farming, you will experience both, and frequently, just make sure neither get the better of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone wants to connect with you, David, or learn more about what you're doing or your report, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, so the report is there alongside yours, actually, Conan, on water resilience, I saw. So all the reports are on the Rural Leaders webpage. And all the reports going back over the different cohorts, but I'll be really biased and said that the cohort I worked alongside, there's some of the best reports you're going to read on there. The rest of it, I generally keep my head down in my day job. You'll see me on LinkedIn, avoiding writing controversial comments under people are extolling the virtues of mass investment in technology on farms as a rule. But yeah, find me on LinkedIn, and that's about it, really. I generally keep my head under the radar where I can, and every now and again I'm more than happy to put it above the parapet and put the odd cat amongst the pigeon, but if only to get people thinking.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today to share your knowledge. It's clear that you're very knowledgeable on this topic, but also some really key takeaways for anyone listening to this about how they should approach problems on their farm as well. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you. Great to talk to you, and hopefully look forward to catching up and sharing a beer with you in person at some stage in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to get that in the calendar.